Take care.
Assistant Village Manager Monroe.
Yes, good evening. We can elaborate on this discussion as much or as little as you prefer this evening. We thought it would be useful to introduce the subject of the Planning and Zoning Commission addressing the recommended code updates for the zoning code on the subject of the transit-oriented development supportive zoning updates. I have a short presentation. It's not to rehash the presentation provided by the consultants selected to assist with this process, but just an introduction so that anyone who's following planning and zoning matters and not necessarily the detailed work of the steering committee that's happened prior, so that we can essentially introduce the topic and to, I guess, create a pathway for further discussion and evaluation of each of the recommendations by the steering committee and the consultant. So I will explain exactly what I just said. I'm going to share my screen and provide a very short presentation. I'll leave the screen up just to perhaps facilitate further discussion, but I will just preface this on it being our zoning code updates that are related to transit-oriented development. This project was, see, here is a purpose of doing so. The primary issues at hand, the reason that this was brought to attention, we had an opportunity to have assistance and technical assistance from the Regional Transit Authority and CMAP, so the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And so the three kind of major ideas was to adopt code standards that support pedestrian and bicycle friendly development. So we can talk more about what that means, but generally it's exactly what it says, something that is from a pedestrian scale, appropriate for the village of Riverside, that bicycles and pedestrians can safely use our streets, sidewalks, and any applicable trails, that there would be appropriate bicycle parking or ways that otherwise promote or enhance the community that would allow for additional walking and biking. And a lot of the time there are elements of development when you're thinking about buildings, land use, and planning that contribute to encouraging that usage. We want to clarify and provide better direction on some of our signage standards. We have a code that addresses particular elements of signage in one aspect when you're talking about business districts, and then the other zone business district doesn't address that signage at all. And so this is just to create some unity, some clarity on those sign standards. And then furthermore, kind of looping back into this transportation element is to prepare the Harlem Avenue corridor for PACE's Pulse Rapid Bus Transit Service. So there's been a longstanding plan to provide that service, and in making certain changes to our zoning codes, may additionally provide support for the regional corridor, as well as residents that could, and businesses that would be calling Riverside home. So timeline, as I said, there was a grant awarded that was actually awarded back in 2019. The great portion, once it got started, was waylaid by the pandemic. And so that consisted of quite some preparation for this project in 2020. 2021 saw the public feedback elements come into play, and the great share of steering committee meetings. So there is a 5-person committee that was selected by the village board for review of these plans. There are resident members. There's a liaison from the village board, as well as 2 liaisons from the Planning and Zoning Commission that sit on that steering committee. And so the work that they've been doing with the planning consultant, Egret and Ox, and Savoy Consulting, has been to walk through our zoning code and identify areas by which we could make changes. And so there are approximately, with all the notes, almost 200 pages of content with notes. And so I apologize for the length of this. They've indicated within those changes, there's been several iterations of those, by the way. The most recent, the second round, has taken into account a lot of, if not all of the feedback by the steering committee and the public feedback received. And that's what you have before you and posted on our website for further review. That's what we'll be using to come up with a review, a plan for review, and any recommended changes by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any proposed text amendments would also at some point visit the Preservation Commission to ensure that those standards that adopted, they provide feedback on how that would impact potentially our historical status and landmark status, and certainly incorporate additional feedback by the Village Board of Trustees. So the plan to adopt is in 2022. It will be a process. As we mentioned, I think in prior Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, the contract that we have with the consultant assistance runs through May of this year. We were fortunate enough to get an extension, and so that's what that's where we landed, with the hope that we would work our way through a good portion of public discussion of the language that would be used in the code updates and arrive at something that could be presented to the village board later this spring. There's a lot of material, and so it may come in pieces or as one package, but that's just kind of to be seen. We'll do our best while we have the aid of the consultants. So as the memo that I provided in the packet very briefly described, there are primary issues that the consultant identified that are addressed by the updates that they're kind of walk through and are recommending. I won't read each of these things, but you can kind of see what, there's everything from our density, height, bulk. We would establish a new zoning district, which I'm going to hit on in a moment. What we do with our commercial areas, everything from storage to parking in alleys, loading zones, what type of use might be permitted on a ground floor in a business district, what type of, even for that matter, what type of office use or commercial use might be appropriate, is up for discussion in these updates. And then of course the revision of the sign code, as I had mentioned. So there's quite a bit of meat to go through. What I was hoping to address, just not overloading everyone, and certainly open it for discussion by this body for whatever you'd like to talk about this evening. But we thought that it might be helpful to address at minimum the establishment of a new zoning district, and then take any other discussion and feedback. I also noted the density, height, and bulk regulations, which are related to the TOD zoning district. So I'll just kind of provide a very brief overview of this, and then we can return to this with any discussion by the commission. But there are 3 current zoning districts in B1. There's sub-districts of that. So what I did here, just noted the existing per standard code language and then pasted in the recommendation for proposed language. And so the B1 commercial district is generally, it's predominantly found on the Harlem Avenue corridor. I should have included a map with this presentation. We could certainly pull one up. But it's predominantly service establishments, office uses, vehicular traffic oriented. And they're mixed use development as well. You often see the commercial area with residential use on top. So there's a significant mixed use in this area. The proposed language, I'll note in each of these sub-districts goes back to the purpose of this code updates, where it's enhancing those roadways as well as pedestrian and bicycle access from the adjacent neighborhoods and connectivity to transit. So each of the new code updates you'll see in each of these sub-districts, as well as in the B2 commercial district code changes proposed, note that bicycle and pedestrian access and then transit access. So this is just a simple kind of inclusion of that. And it's a little bit of cleanup of that language. There's a second existing district in B1 is called a Transitional District. It's very similar to the B1 along Harlem Avenue. There's a little bit that kind of, it's up on Quincy and Burlington area where it starts to transition into a residential zone. And so the use might be lighter in there, a little bit less vehicle traffic, and is, potentially an area where building height or, mixed use of those buildings might be seen less frequently. This as well, like I said, just kind of adds that pedestrian and bicycle friendly component. There's only 2 more slides, I think, in this. So now what the work of the steering committee has come up with is to add a zoning sub-district in this B1 area. It's the only new zoning district that's recommended or asked about. And that's to be very specific and intentional about our transit-oriented development. So this reads as proposed code that the sub-district, which is centered, I guess, on Harlem Avenue, it's fairly centered, and we'll again pull up this map, but it's centered along Harlem Avenue within Riverside, and supports, as it says, multifamily residential, retail, service, office, employment generating uses. It's centered towards the railroad and in close proximity to nearby bus and commuter rail facilities. So the placement is intentional, and residential uses would be permitted above the ground floor only. And then the uses would also appropriately transition into those surrounding districts, continuing with this mindset of pedestrian and bicycle friendly, environment. My last slide of the presentation today, I just wanted to show you, your discussion is up to you, but we also hit on the building heights in case that was a desired element of discussion this evening. So we have a chart here, and I can certainly go back to it as necessary. Essentially, they're adding or recommending an added minimum building height. We have a maximum building height, of which is revised slightly in the B1 districts. And then they've included this segment where we would include a minimum of 24 feet as the building height. So it's more in feet, not as much reliant on the number of stories in a building, just based on the types of uses that you might be able to have within a business district. So you might have a commercial commercial property that's only a single story, but the height might be taller to accommodate whatever that business might be. And so the committee had opted to, I think a preference for a foot measurement rather than by story. So that concludes my kind of overview of discussion. We certainly could pick up any other topic, but I wanted to be prepared on a couple of these items and at least kick off the discussion, identify what elements you might be most interested in addressing at this or your next meeting. So we'll close and hand it back to Chair Mateo.
Thank you, Assistant Village Manager Monroe. That was nicely done. So as you've seen, these are hundreds and hundreds of pages of proposed changes. They are just proposed. We can recommend those to the board. We can make changes to it. We can do whatever we want. I wanted this to come to us tonight kind of as homework. So between now and our next meeting, try to read it. Try to go through the red lines so that we can have a full discussion. Many of those pages, you're going to look at it and go, yeah, fine, yeah, fine. It's truly minor. Maybe they're adding in bicycles or bicycle parking or bike access. Okay, that's going to be fine. It's the more substantive things that Ms. Monroe highlighted that we really need to spend our time talking about and debating. So building heights is probably going to be something that will catch the public's eye. Whether or not having a different commercial district is something that we'll need to discuss. What are the potential benefits? Are there any potential costs to doing that? So between now and again, our next meeting, I hope that you can carve out some time, when you can't sleep, to go through those red lines so that we're prepared next time to start going through it. How we're going to do it, I don't know. I don't think we're going to go page by page. I think we'll go topic by topic as outlined here. One question I had for staff, and I see Attorney Mars is no longer with us. This isn't an 8-page amendment. This is so big. How are you going to track tweaks that we want to make to it? Besides the usual way? I mean, is it as simple as that?
I would suppose that the goal will be to, as I haven't personally been through or at least not in the last decade, I haven't been through a code update of this magnitude. Often the easiest way, like you said, is just kind of taking it topic by topic. I attempted to identify when and where those things show up in this memo. It's not perfect, but using the consultants' work, kind of those tables that they reference, where you can jump to a certain section as a guide for those major topics and issues. So what we might, identify is whether we want to, address, like you said, by topic rather than a full scale update to the code. It may be broken into sections or segments where we bring forward text amendments, each month instead of in a full package, because there's so much here. Okay. And conversation may evolve over that period of time, where a decision made on one item could potentially reflect something different than you'd prefer. So I suppose we should be open to that and certain that whatever is brought forward for amendments to the code, that we have general consensus.
I don't know if I mentioned this at our last meeting. So the village's first zoning ordinance was adopted in 1922. So assuming the village board approves a change this year, it'll be 100 years since our first one. And Riverside was one of the first communities in Illinois to have one, in part to preserve what will become our landmark status. Too many homes were being torn down, so they needed a zoning ordinance. The last big update was in 2005. I don't think this is anywhere near what was done in 2005, but we do want to get it done, but we want to take our time and do it right and have enough public meetings so that businesses and residents have ample opportunities to opine on potential changes. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?
Questions mostly. If we have questions on how some of these elements were developed, are they better forwarded to Ms. Monroe? For example, an initial thought was, how was the difference between the facade height and the building height seen as significant, or why is there a difference there? Are those legitimate questions, or do you want those ahead of time? Are those easier to process in between meetings?
Yes, generally, yes. So if you have questions as you're reviewing the document and have questions about how decisions or recommendations came to be, it likely because neither myself or Francisco were part of staff when the initial proposal and request for this project came to be. While we work in the code and we certainly see the need for many of these changes and understand why we're doing it, we were not present in the initial meeting. So there are things that may be present in the minutes of the steering committee that would give us context, past memos from staff that we can catch and try and identify. If you haven't been reading all those either, we can try and see what the rationale or reasoning was for those. I'll note that the steering committee, they have draft minutes that have not been approved from some of the meetings in the fall that have some more information about how the bigger issues maybe that were still needed additional discussion had come to be. And so we're waiting for the committee to come back and approve those minutes, in which case that might also aid us in providing additional information or background that could help discussion here.
That makes sense, and I didn't express it very well, but basically my goal in asking that is why and what were the thoughts of the committee in making that recommendation, so that by understanding that, then it probably makes it much easier to accept or have that further discussion here.
Sure. I would also say to remind you that we have two members of the steering committee on this commission, and so having taken part in that, they were the ones discussing it and could probably shed additional light on those meetings and what that rationale was.
And I'll also point out that sometimes that type of question can be answered and other times it won't be. It could be something that the consultants just recommended, and given the totality of all the recommendations, it just might not have hit our radar, or like, okay, fine, or we just don't remember. Links to the Zoom recordings of our meetings are available. So if you were really, really having a hard time sleeping and could extract from the meeting minutes which meeting it was from and could go to that Zoom, you're welcome to do that. There are other times where we would remember. So for example, why are in the maximum heights changed from the number of stories to the number of feet? That one I remember, and that's because one of the steering committee members who does commercial real estate said, Starbucks doesn't want to have 2 stories, but if you tell them they can build up to 24 feet, they're fine with that. So that's why we went that way, for example. So again, sometimes answers will be available, sometimes they won't.
And that's absolutely fair. I think what you said was that I have skimmed it. I have not read every revision in detail yet, but having skimmed it, many of those recommendations are, yes, it's just fine and we can probably move on. So I'm assuming that it's the big items that would be remembered or would have been documented somehow. The other question I had, and I am also looking at a second screen, in our packet from today, in the primary issues portion of the memo, first page, it identifies some page numbers. What page numbers are those referring to? Because I cannot correlate that to the 12/2/21 village board packet.
Yes. Okay. So that is it's essentially the start of the memo for the zoning code update. So it was not a page number that would correlate with the agenda packet, like the PDF page, but it would be the page identified for, whatever that might be. There's discussion of, parkings, alleys, and loading in business districts. You'd start with page 6, where it, in that memo packet with the code red lines, where you would be able to find that. If it requires additional clarification, I can certainly provide an updated memo with more instruction on which page numbers to follow.
That would be helpful. I was specifically trying to look at the ADU rules and even searching on accessory. The word accessory wasn't super helpful because there's a lot of accessory word. There are a lot of mentions of the word accessory in the document.
Correct. Yeah. I had trouble kind of narrowing those down, in which case was the reason in the first place I tried to give a page number to help. But if it wasn't navigable, then we will make some updates and try to make that easier to find.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to go through too much work. Even if you tell me a correlation, that's good. If page 4 and 5 on our planning and zoning agenda where it says see page 4 and 5 on the memo from community development happens to refer to some other, if I need to add 5 pages to find it in the VBOT agenda packet, then just tell me that.
Okay. We can probably separate the zoning memo with the red lines as its own document, and that should help.
Whatever you think makes sense.
I had a similar question. I just wanted to make sure I know what the definitive document is that we're supposed to be looking at when we're looking at these red lines, because I had a little trouble navigating or relating the page numbers and all the rest. So is it whatever is attached to our packet for tonight, your 4-page memo and the links and the links that are embedded in that? That is what we should be following.
Correct.
Okay. No other, we don't need to look at the Todd steering committee page or the village board page or anything else, just what you gave us tonight.
Yes. So you can look at the TOD steering committee page for those, additional context of those meetings and that information. But what I think makes sense is we'll pull out those most recent second draft red lines, and we'll provide them to you. And we will also post them maybe on the Planning and Zoning Commission page or as being discussed. I don't know. I don't know if that would be recommended, Chairperson, or if you prefer that they just stay on the steering committee page with all the other documents. But we'll certainly get them. to everyone.
Let's talk about it, because if we do put it on PZC's website, that's another way of making it public.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
So there would be sign code red line, zoning code red line, sign code memo with jump links, and then zoning code memo with jump links. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Other questions, thoughts?
I have sort of a general question. This whole pace pulse bus thing, I know nothing about it. And is it a reality right now in other communities, or any background on that?
I am actually meeting with the consultant team tomorrow on a different related transit issue, and I will get some updates for us on that. I think it would also be helpful to have a status update. So it's a good question, and something that I will look into and communicate with RTA about regarding the, the plans or how close we are.
A different answer is, which is also true, if you go to the village website and search steering committee and then go to our project page, there's resources or documents. One of them, there are a couple of sites there that have all you could ever want to read about the project, including the last time the documents were updated, what the current status is. So there are different routes that are in different stages of development or completion. So Ashley will find out what's happening with Harlem, but there are other ones that, are actually happening.
Thank
Okay.
you.
It would be nice to know if I don't know that any of them are complete actually at this point, but if there is, it would be nice to know where that one is.
Can I just went to the webpage. Milwaukee, Cermak Road, Harlem, and Roosevelt are all in the planning stage, or actually, I should say the corridor planning and visioning stage. Others have already been implemented or are in more advanced stages than Harlem, Cermak, and Roosevelt.
The pessimist would say nothing's happening in the short term, but we're planning for it. Other questions?